from an exercise and then they're asking us to do something and you're not even sure what you're starting with anymore. So I think that's good advice.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other good questions or bad questions? Well, if you have any questions or after we're done, we will stay on because that's when office hours are. They're after this class from 1 to 2. And we'll just stay on the Zoom lens. Oh, good God. On the Zoom, and then you can ask other questions. All right.
Yeah, I would say one thing about the homework is we do take a good look at it and grade it accordingly. And, you know, if for some reason you don't get full credit, there's usually a good reason for it. In some cases, there might be 3 exercises and somebody might only do 1 exercise and then they can't expect to get full credit. But if that's the case, we will enter a comment. So if for some reason you don't get full credit on an assignment, take a look at the comments and see why, and perhaps learn from that.
All right, so I'm just going to say one more thing, and then John's going to take it away. I injured myself. I sprained my ankle rather badly on Tuesday, and there is a good chance, and I'm having a difficult time hobbling around. So I won't know how I feel about coming in on Monday until like Sunday night. So I will send an announcement telling you whether I'm coming in or not, because I don't want you to waste your time if I'm still unable to proficiently walk, unfortunately. So I just wanted to let you know that ahead of time, but Sunday I'll send a message letting you know if I'm going to be in class on Monday or the following Thursday. Okay? All right. All right. I am going to let John now continue with chapter 4. So you want to share your screen.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is kind of go through chapter 4, which is learning how to work with loops, with lists. And I have a number of PowerPoint slides, and I'm hoping that we can run through all of them, if not most of them, in the time that we have remaining. And at the same time, I'd kind of like you to follow along with either Colab or PyCharm or whatever text editor you're using. And I'll get to that when we can, it's just so we can kind of play with things ourselves. Now, chapter 4 begins talking about what's called looping through a list. And as you know, lists can contain many items. And you might want to go through this list and say, create a message. And what happens is when you begin a loop, you start by pulling in the first name of the list, and then you might want to do something with that first name and then go on to the next name. And this is what's called a for loop. And the simplest sort of for loop that I can kind of think of is where you might want to print all the items in a list. And so the way to do it is you create what's called a for loop that begins with a for statement. And in this case, we might create a list of users, and we might want to print some message to all the users. Or we might simply want to print out a list of all the users. And what I have drawn here is what's called a flowchart. And unfortunately, this class doesn't really get much into flowcharts. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with flowcharts, but a flowchart basically shows the logic of your routine. And it begins with a start and it ends with a stop. And then it has all the steps that you run through. Now, what happens when you have a for loop is you start the loop. And in this case, what we typically do is we'll start it by having a list of users. And then we'll start addressing each user using this for statement. It goes for a user in this list of users. We follow that with a colon, and then we indent what we want. And in this case, we want it just to print the name of the user. So what happens in here is that we start here, it pulls in the first name, and it sort of asks questions, are you done? And if the answer is yes, then you stop. If the answer is no, if it pulls in a name, then you print it out and you go back and then you pull in the next name on the list. And you can kind of see here, there's a loop going on. We circle around in this loop. Let me go to, let's see. Let me make this a little larger. So we go through this loop here, and you can see it's actually a loop in this flow chart. We loop around and we loop around and we loop around. Each loop we pull in a name and print it out until we're all done, and then we exit. So you can see that there's an actual loop here. Other things that can happen, and when we get to chapter 5, we'll go to what's called branching, where rather than looping, we might actually branch and go one way according to one condition or another way according to another condition. But right now we're talking about looping. And the reason they call it looping is simply that there's this little loop that's going on where we pull in an item, do something, pull in the next item, do something, until we're finally done, and then we exit. Now, here's an exercise where I have a list of users, and I have a list of users here, and so I'm going to use this typical routine here. Now, according to our rules here, okay, when we set up a loop, Python pulls in each item from the list of users, in this case, the first one, starting with the first one, val. Then it will execute whatever we tell it to do. In this case, print. So it should print val, and then it will then go to Bob, print Bob, go to Mia, print Mia, go to Ron, print Ron, go to Ned, print Ned. And then what happens is there's no input, so then it exits. Now, it's very important here, two things. One is we have this for statement with a colon, and then we indent what we want it to do each time. If it's not indented, then it's not executed until the program is done running this for loop. So if I take something, now I'm just going to copy this code here. Now let me go to Colab, which is what we ask everyone to use.
So this is my comment to him. I make it look so
the
easy.
Zoom keeps going over what I want to click on.
Wow.
So if I open up a Colab assignment here, And this is kind of what we want you to do for your homework, and hopefully you'll have some experience by now. First thing is I might want to label it. And if it's an exercise, chapter 3, you know.
Still showing the PowerPoint.
Chapter 3.
Yeah, you don't, you're not at Colab. Thanks.
You can't see my screen?
You
Nope.
have to switch which screen is sharing.
Yep.
Uh,
I'll go help him. My bad
okay,
ankle.
just a second. Let me. All right, now can you see it?
Yep.
Colab.
Yeah.
All right. So the first thing is, so you pull up, you know, a Colab. First thing to do is go in and give it a title. And in this case, let me just call it a lecture. And then I could put perhaps the date on it, but I'll just call it a lecture. And then start with text. Well, it wants to start with code, but start with text. And here you would say, you know, exercise 1 or something like this. And in this case, you know, we're talking about looping. So you might call it something like looping. And then our code. Then we go to our code. Now, what I did was for my PowerPoint slide is I simply copied. Just a second. From my PowerPoint slide, you can do this at, you know, at your home, at home, do it yourself. It's not a, well, anyways, so let's start with users and we'll create a list. So if you could run through this with me, it'll help. So let's quickly create a list of users. And I'll say, there's Ron. Bob. And Sue. So those are our users. Now, next was our for statement for user in users, colon. There's our for statement. What we want is to print the user. Print out the name. And we click here to run it. And there's our list. So that's the first part. So I'm hoping at home you're following along and doing this. Now, so that's our first for loop. Now let's go back to our rules about indented statements are executed for each item in the list. So if we then have our users, let me see if I can copy and paste. Oh, let's see. So if I go back to my PowerPoint, can you see my PowerPoint now? Or do I have to?
Yeah,
We can see you swapping.
You can see the PowerPoint here. So if I go there, and then I want to now that's that. So I want to change this a little. So rather than saying print user, I want to do something a little different. I want to print, and I'll use an if statement here. Oops, I'm sorry. And then welcome, and then user.
So while he's typing, the word user, is that a required word for that particular code?
You're asking people at home.
Yeah, I'm asking that, and I'm asking you. So,
User isn't, but users is, right?
correct, correct. So it could have been print people in users, right? It could have been, because user is a variable, right? It's a temporary storage place where we're storing a value. And that's a really important concept for people to keep in mind. So here, when we're doing this if statement here, we got a lot going on here. We have the F, we have the welcome, and then we see our curly Q lines that we use for variables, right? So this should start to be making sense to you from chapter 2 on. It's pretty important to see how these kind of, these follow. Okay, so now we're printing.
Now, so what I've done here is I've done something a little fancier where I will first print out welcome whoever it is, and then print out we're glad to see you. And so if I run it, this is what happens. Welcome, Ron. We're glad to see you. Welcome, Bob. We're glad to see you. Welcome, Sue. We're glad to see you.
Okay, so here's a quiz question for my folks at home. We wanted to say at that very bottom, we're glad to see you, and the username. What does John have to do to code? To get the username after we're glad to see you, Ron. We're glad to see you, Bob. We're glad to see you, Sue. Come on, you guys know the answer. So wouldn't you wouldn't you use the same variable?
We
User.
we need to speed this up. So
Oh,
yeah, so if you want to say Ron down here, then you just use an F statement and insert user, or add a string of user, convert it to a string, and then print it out. So you could have change this to an F statement here. We're glad to see you. And let me put this comma, and then put, I'm always for saving time and energy whenever I can. Whoops. Put a period there. And now let's run it. And so it says, welcome, Ron. We're glad to see you, Ron. Welcome, Bob. We're glad to see you, Bob. Anyway, so that's what you would do, is you'd convert it to an F. The easiest way is to convert it to an F. But let me go back to the original one to show you the next rule. So if I go back here, run it again, you can see what it is here. But notice that this is indented here. What if I didn't indent it? So
It wouldn't recognize it as part of the loop, right?
correct.
right, it executes the loop, and then it goes on from the loop to whatever the next step is. And the next step is to do this. So if I've done things right, it's going to do welcome Ron, welcome Bob, welcome Sue, and then we're glad to see you. And I can put it all there. And so if I click on it here, that's what happens. Welcome Ron, welcome Bob, welcome Sue, and we're glad to see you all. So it's the importance of indenting. The difference is if it's indented, it's going to print, the for statement doesn't end until it's run through everyone. Here, the for statement ends here at the end of the indent. So now let's see. Now, if you can see my PowerPoint slides, are they on? Can people see it now?
Yep.
This slide here?
Yeah.
Okay, some common errors. Forgetting to indent. So let me sort of get rid of this line here. Forgetting to indent. What if for user and users print, welcome user. Then what happens? That's a common error. We forget to indent. If I run it, I'll get some error code. Another problem we might run into is if you indent unintentionally. So now let me go back to here where it runs. So here, let me get rid of this here. I've got too much going on here. All right, so let me add code here. So suppose we have a message. And whoops, you know, the message that we used to print was, you know, hello world. And then what if we unintentionally indent? Now, if I run this, everything's fine. But what if I unintentionally indent it? Then I get an error code, an indentation error, unexpected indent. So another problem here was, you know, if we had, you know, the example I'd shown you, if we had indented, what we're glad to see you all, it would have been printed after everyone's name. And one other problem here is, what if I forget? So that this runs fine. What if I forget the colon for user and users here, and then try running it? I'll get this error here, syntax error, search stack overflow. And all because I have a for statement without the colon. So these are common errors that people do when they're trying to write a for loop. Now, next part here, so that's kind of looping. Let me get rid of these error messages. Just to make this look a little neater. Hopefully, when you hand in your homework, you've gotten rid of all the error messages and run a nice clean version. And now that this is using range function. And here what we're going to do is we're going to use the range function to print a list of numbers. And so let me move this back over a little bit here. So now remember the range function starts at 0 by default and stops one number below the number passed to it. So if you want to print the numbers 0 to 10, we can create this little for statement. for number. Now it doesn't have to be number. It could be just anything we want to call it. For X. I just did that for simplicity in range. And then here we have, by default, it starts at 0 and then it goes to the end. And then we want to, oops, I forgot my colon.
It's a common error.
And then we want to print the number. And so, boom, if I hit it, there's our it starts at 0 to 10. Now, if I want to print it from 1 to 10, I have to start it at 1. So that the range goes from print from 1 to 11. And then if I run it, boom, there we go, 1 to 10. Now, what we can also do is we can use the list function to generate a list of numbers. So by using list along with range. And all we need to do is, let me start another line of code here, text, well, let me, using list, and then add code here. So let me call, here I'll call numbers our list. And we use the list function along with the range function. Go away. And we'll go back to our range of 1 to 11. And then now, let me print the list. Boom. So you can see what I did was now, rather than printing them out individually here from 1 to 10, is I created a list instead, and I printed them all out in a line. And the way I did this was by using the list function along with the range function. Here's the range function, 1 to 11, gives us 1 to 11. Here's the list function with the range function, and it prints from 1 to 10. Now, I hope you're kind of following along, you know, trying this yourself as we go along. Now, there's some fancier things we can do too, where we might want to, let's see, add code. Here we're doing squares. So we might want to, okay, add code here. So now we might want to generate a list of just the square numbers from 1 to 11. And the way we do this here, I don't think that's allowing me to cut and paste. No, it's not. Anyways, it's something I could do. But just walking you through it, first of all, let's create our list. And we'll start with a null list, just nothing in it. Whoops, I'm sorry. A null list. And then we'll add to it. So 4, and then we do, now it could be number, we could call it anything we want. I'll just say X in this range of 1 to 11. Remember the colon. And then we'll say the square equals X squared, and so then we take our X from 1 to 11, we square it, we then add it to our list. Now I kind of hope that which we called squares, by using append method and what I called square. So now I could have saved myself a little time by getting rid of square. I could have said squares append and then just X asterisk asterisk 2 here, but now I'm generating a list. Now what I want is, when I'm all done, is let's just print the list. So if I've done everything right, I run through it. This goes from 1 to 11, or I'm sorry, 1 to 10, and it squares it. So these are the squares of the numbers. Now, as I said, it's important for you to kind of follow along with this, because, part of your homework assignment, what you have to do is you've got to use a for loop to create a list. And this is how you do it. You start with a null set, you use a for, you step through your items, and then you add them one at a time to your list. And then when you're all done, you can print it out as a nice little list.
Okay, so John, I'm just gonna, this is it's got a lot of stuff going on in this particular piece of code. So we'll just kind of review. So we know that we created the list here, and what was the name of the list?
Squares.
Squares, thank you. And so squares doesn't mean that it's doing some mathematical thing. It could have been Joe, right? This is just the name we gave this list. Okay, and then we go to the 4x, and as John just talked about, we know that that's going to tell it what? When you see that 4x in when you see 4, what do you know is happening? It's going to have some kind of a loop, right?
Yes.
Yep. So this is it. We're building here, guys. Good, Jared. So we say 4. Just bear with me, John, on this. So 4. We're going to do a loop, and we're defining here that we're defining a range here. So our range is from 1 to 11, which is really 0 through 10, right? Because we have that index, right? And we know it's going to be a loop because we start with the 4, we define our variable of x, and then we have we end it with our colon here. And then here we define another variable, right? So we're saying for each item in this list, which is coming from this range, we're going to do a mathematical calculation. And this x double asterisk 2 is a mathematical calculation to create a square. Okay? And then if that hasn't been enough fun, we then say, okay, we're going to add these, append these. We're using our method of append, adding to the back of it. So it says it's going to read through this range, and as it goes through each item, 1 times 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, is going to add to the back of it all of the squares, and then it's going to print it. So this example has got a list, a loop, a variable, a calculation, a method, and a function. Okay, I'm done.
Okay, now, suppose we wanted to, now, what do we have here? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines here. What if we wanted to kind of simplify this a little bit? What way could we do it? Well, I was kind of, maybe we can get rid of square. And the way we do that is, let's just say append here x instead, and get rid of this step. We've simplified it a little. Let's see if it works. It works. So we've gone to this for statement being 3 lines down to 2. So this is kind of a way of making it a little simpler, a little more elegant. Now, there's something that's called a comprehension, is a more efficient way to do the same operation. So this is a comprehension. Now, there's an even simpler way of doing this, and that's at this point here where we start with squares. We could go at squares, we could say squares equals this value for x in range 1 to 11. To 11, and get rid of these two, and get rid of all of this.
I don't think that's going to work, but okay.
And let's try running it.
Yes.
It works.
Okay, so why didn't it need the semicolon, the colon?
Because it's all included. Where would you put the colon? It's at the end of the for statement. It's right here. It's unnecessary.
All right, well.
Okay. There's no additional step at this point. Okay, there's no indent if you want. We want it to run through this whole range before we print out anything. So we're not asking it to do anything. So this is called a comprehension. It's just a more efficient way of doing things. So as you can see, we went from it being 5 steps to 4 steps, and now we're down to 2 steps to do all the same thing, generate the squares. Now here's another example. And let me just start all over again. Here, suppose we have a list of names. So let's actually, somewhere up here, oh, okay, we've got users. Let me be a little faster here. So let me start with users. We've got a list of users here. And what we want to do is we want to capitalize all of these here. And so we want to convert it all to uppercase. So what can we do? We can start with some here, upper, we'll start with a blank. We could start with a blank list and then do our for statement for user in users. colon. And then what we do here is we upper dot, we take our list and we add the user, append user, and we add the upper method to it. And then, well, let's see, when we're all done, let's just print it. Print. Oops. Print. So does everyone see what we're doing? We create an empty list. Then we run through each element here with using our we pull the first one in. Okay, we convert it to uppercase and then add it. Maybe, let me just, we might get a little trouble.
I was going to say that didn't work for me.
Yeah, but that's because upper, I was using upper, but upper's a method, so it'll probably get a little confused. So let's just call it up instead of upper. So users, we will then take the user, put it in uppercase, and then append it to this empty list. Now let me try running through it. Whoops. User.
I would use title.
I mean, right here, let's see.
No, I'd use, instead of upper, I'd use title. User dot title. I've had some problem with upper myself.
Oh, I'm sorry. I printed out the original list. I don't want it to print out the original list. I want it to print out the list up.
Oh, Mr. Tariq, here we see the problem.
Okay, I printed out the wrong list. I printed out this list where I wanted to print out this list in uppercase.
See, it's not that easy. There we go.
So I printed out the wrong list. That was my mistake. Well, again, comprehension's a more efficient way of doing it. What we could have done.
All right, let's just slow down for a second here. Let's just review what we've got going on here. Once again, we have a lot of stuff. So what is this here, users? What is this, guys?
List.
Yep, good, Jared. And then what is this up?
That's another list.
Another list with nothing in it. And then what's this for users, for user in users in this list? What's happening here?
Our loop.
Say again?
It's creating the loop.
Creating a loop. We're going to read through a loop. And then what's happening here?
We're changing the casing of it.
Excellent. So we're saying this list, append, that's how come it's going to go one right after another, right? Append one after another. User from our loop, and then we're using this method upper, which made it all upper as opposed to title, which would have just made the first line title. You know, finish it, and then we print the list now, which we just have created with the title, Ron, Bob, Sue titled. Okay.
All right. Now, again, a comprehension is just, hey, an easier way to do it, or a quicker way, a more elegant way of doing it. So what could we do? Well, what we could do is, what we want to do is take this part, take each user and convert it to uppercase. So let me take out that and put it up here. And take the for user in users here, take that out and stick it up there. So now I've taken 3 lines and boiled it down to 1. Here we take each user in users, convert it to the uppercase, and add it to our list. And boom, I hit it, and there it prints out the list. So that's just something to kind of get used to it. There's multiple ways of doing the same thing. There's one of doing it, you know, bit by bit, and then there's one where you can actually combine steps. In this case, I took 3 steps and combined it into 1. So rather than creating an empty list, converting it, each one to upper, and then adding it to the list, I did it all in 1 line. Now, according to my time, we're kind of running out of time.
Yeah. So what I want to reassure everyone is you do this how you feel comfortable. So for example, I think it's really important that you understand all those components as what's going on. When we get to this comprehension of this more comprehensive, compressed version of code, you'll get there. But more importantly is to do it in a way that you methodically understand it than to try to make the code really concise. That'll come because we'll want to get you there. But right now we need to understand the concepts. So given that we have only gotten this far and it is chapter 4, I think the homework was due like Sunday. So I'm going to move the homework back then a couple of days. Okay, because on Monday we'll finish then chapter 4 and hopefully start chapter 5. Okay.
Yeah, so there's something basically it's called slicing that I didn't get to, and we'll have to let that go until
Monday. So Monday we're starting with slice. Okay. All right, so look for an email to know whether or not I will be at Ballston. If I can walk, I will be there. I might be with one of these big boots, but that's okay. All right, and then just keep working on everything. And I'm very happy that everybody is moving forward. This is like learning a brand new language. It is a brand new language, but just imagine if you were speaking it to people. So now you're speaking Python. So, all right, anybody who wants to stay on, feel free to stay on. Anybody, I'm going to stop the recording. Anybody who